Thank you. I'd like to call this meeting of the General Government Committee meeting to order. It is August 5th at 5 p.m. 2020. And this is not only do we have council members present, but this is also being carried on Zoom. And today we're going to have a discussion of sales tax and the US 50 pedestrian crossing. But before we do that, could we have the roll call, please?
Councilmember Dennehy.
Here.
Councilmember Gonzalez. Absent. Councilmember Jaquez.
Here.
Councilmember Meisner. Absent. Councilmember Reed. Absent. Councilmember B. Smith.
Here.
Mayor Pro Tem Hamrick.
Here.
Mayor Smith.
Here.
Thank you, Cindy. So with that, I guess we're all queued up for a sales tax discussion, and I'll turn that over to our staff.
All right. Back in, I think it was April, we started this conversation, wanted to get a little bit through COVID and some of those other responses. So we're bringing this topic back up for discussion. And with that, I'll hand it over to Tammy Nordyke, our Finance Director, for the presentation.
As City Administrator Ryan Stevens said, we had started this discussion earlier in the year about whether or not the city should move towards state collection on sales tax or not. At that time, we determined that there would not be enough time for us to get the code updated and to get everything in place because we have a 45-day window before the effective date. And we would have had to have everything done by May to be effective in June, so we just wouldn't have had the time to do it. At that time, it was suggested that we come back later in the year, but still early enough that we could get all of the changes made, and actually to come back later in the year to talk to council to see if they wanted us to move forward with making the changes and still have enough time to get those changes made before our deadline. If we did go state collected, we would look at going January 1st. So that means that we would have to have all of our code changes done and the documents signed to the state by the beginning of mid-November, because we have to have it 45 days in advance. So that's what we're looking at. So currently the city is self-collected. Our sales tax program itself is not really user-friendly, and our filing periods require additional paperwork for businesses and the city staff, just with a lot of how our process works. What we're proposing is to look at going state collected. What that does is it aligns our filing periods with the state, because right now with the business that might be an annual filer with the state, they're a monthly filer with the city. And so instead of them filing one return a year, they're having to do 12 returns plus the state. So that's how there's additional paperwork for the businesses. And then it would also eliminate an additional return for the business to file, because when they file their state return, it would file their state, their county, and their city return versus doing the state and county and then a separate city return. So it helps reduce that as well. And then overall, it helps the city reduce our costs as well. What we found is that we see that our pros are that our lines with Wayfair. We did go ahead and sign up for what they refer to as the SUTS. It's the State Unified Tax System, which means that out-of-state retailers can go online now to the state and file a return for not only the state, the county, and for the city. We just went live with that at the end of July, or basically in the last few weeks, so we will not see anything probably until August or September from that system to see how that's actually going to work for us. We're also saying that we could save an additional $18,000 a year in fixed costs, because we would not have to have our lockbox, we would not be mailing out letters, so we wouldn't have postage, we wouldn't have envelopes, and then of course the printing fees associated with doing all of that. We would have increased enforcement. Right now, our enforcement is very, very limited. We have one employee that does all of our collections and enforcement, which we have stepped it up a little, but we're still lacking in that. With the state, they have more individuals to be able to do it. We can also talk to the state and say, we have this business that we're concerned about. They can look at it and actually start the enforcement on it. And then we could also have the potential of the revenue increases. When we had looked at the number of filings that the state received versus the non-filings, or the filings that the city had, the state had 572 businesses listed with physical locations, where we were only showing 371. And so we still have that discrepancy. And then their online filers, they had over 8,000, where we have a little over 1,200 in our system. So there's potential for us to gain revenue. One of the cons with it is we'd get the revenue once a month. It would be, instead of us receiving it around the 20th of the month, we would not receive it until around the 10th of the following month. So anything that was paid in August, we would not receive those funds till September. So there's a little bit of a delay with that, but I think the benefits outweigh that. We would also lose the sales tax license fee, because if we go state collected, we cannot require our businesses to have a sales tax license within the city. So we would lose that. If we are to go state collected, we would need to have an executed agreement with the state. Our deadline is 45 days prior to January 1. And then we'd have to have the code modified to allow for the filing periods to align with the state. And then there may be other language that states that we are state collected versus self-collected. A concern that we'd have is, what do we do with our current full-time employee? That person would still need to monitor the collections and report any accounts of concern to the state. They would also need to be working on collections for tax periods prior to December 31st of 2020. They would also monitor and audit the sales tax collected on the building permits. And then we would also have them cross-train and backfill vacant positions within finance. Currently, we still have a part-time position that we've put on hold for payroll, and that's been being fulfilled by one of our accounting managers. So if we had some free time up with the sales tax person, then that person could train to do either the payroll, or we also have an employee who will be retiring, and they can train to do some of those duties as well. So we're looking at that, so that person would still be employed with the city. And then what would happen is we would our sales tax program through our current financial program would end by the end of the year. We'd have to close the lockbox, and then we would have the our online payment portal. It would be discontinued as well. And that is what I have. What questions does council have for me? Or for Catherine? I think she's on the line.
The mayor has control of the box. Why don't you just call on people that?
Councilmember Dennehy?
I just have a quick question. It would be back on a few, but you don't even need to move it, but when we're looking at the reduced cost or the loss of the license fee, can we get any idea of what that number roughly would be, or?
Yes. Give me one moment.
And just to let you know, I'm a big fan of revenue online with the state, so I'm good with that.
So you're good with that. And we talked about we'd save approximately $18,000 in the fixed costs, and then with losing our license fee, we have about 1,800 licenses, so that would be
16,000, roughly, just rounded around.
yeah,
Okay.
exactly.
Okay.
No, 36.
I was just curious on those numbers.
Yeah, about
so-
36. So we'd be netting about 18, but we also feel that we would be able to capture more of the online sales. Like I said, we have not been able to see any of that yet by us just going to this other program, but
And that would be a good way to, they would have no choice now. It's definitely a good option.
yep.
Thanks.
I understand, Brandon, you're next, but if you wish to ask a question, just go ahead and give me a wave or something.
Okay.
Because I don't.
So what does this change do with the actual business owner? Is they're just continuing to refile their state sales tax license and not the city?
What would happen is when the business would file their state sales tax return, it would have another column for the city on there. Because
Okay.
currently you have the state and the county on there. It would also have the city listed as well. So you just
So-
have the one return.
Okay, so they just refile the city sales tax return, but they're not gonna renew in January for their city sales tax license, correct?
Correct. They would just renew with the state sales tax licensing.
Basically, what we're trying to do is set up a one-stop shop where
Right.
they go to one place and they file everything at the same time.
My concern was just if we had to force business owners to do a little bit extra legwork on there, or if it was just streamlined into that state sales tax license.
Yes.
So does that go right on, like, just on the state's tax page of revenue online? And then the city part would automatically, because right now, obviously, it doesn't. So is that something that, if this gets approved, anybody from this county or from this area code gets put in? Is that how
Yes.
that works?
That is correct.
Okay.
Basically, they would switch us to state collected, and any licenses that have been issued within Canyon City would automatically have the option to file, well, they would be required to file
I'll be honest,
through them.
I love that.
Yeah.
Councilman Meisner.
I'm not a real big fee person to start with, but typically I hear the justification for a fee is because we have staff expending time and effort to process those applications. And now that they're not doing that, I would see that as some kind of a savings, not as a loss of revenue.
Yeah, and we would, the revenue that's generated is approximately 36,000. We're looking at having 18,000 in fixed costs, with the postage and printing and that we would not have to do. So the program itself, there would still be, if you looked at the offset of the salary, there would be 18,000 that would not be supported by some of the licensing fees. But we know that by having that employee do other functions within the department, we will have savings to make up for that.
Tammy, how will our businesses be notified about the changes when they come into fruition?
What would happen is the state would put all of the correspondence out, all of the notifications. The state would do that. We could work in conjunction with them to put something on our social media and to also do a press release. But we'd want to make sure that we're coordinating all of that with the state Department of Revenue.
And if I understand it correctly, we actually mail out notices or some type of information to each business license holder monthly, is that correct? Is that what we do now?
Right now, we do an annual mailing of license renewals. If they do not renew at that time, we do a reminder notice. And then monthly, we will send out missing filer report. Basically, if you have not filed your taxes with us, we send you out a notice stating that you're missing it. And then eventually, we do send out assessments and then take, what other enforcement we
Thank
need
you.
at that point.
And I would suggest that it might be worthwhile, in terms of trying to be business friendly, that when we have it all set up with the state and we're ready to throw the switch, the cutover switch, where the state takes over, of course, the state will be notifying, but it might be worthwhile for us to do an annual notice type thing, one last notice to all business owners, that be aware that the city's not going to be collecting this, the state will be. You should have received, information from the state, et cetera, et cetera. If you have questions, call whoever.
Yeah,
Okay.
absolutely. I think that's something that we could coordinate as well.
Does this also include,
Tim, don't forget your.
excuse me, does this also include, renewing your licenses? Is that going to be through the state as well, or is that still through the city?
You would only have the one license. You would not be required to have a city sales tax license. It would only be the state sales tax license.
Okay. Well, I'm just talking like my vendor license and that.
All of those licenses would, do those
You'd like
still
the
stand?
Right,
food truck
yeah.
license or
Well, I have
any other.
you know what I'm talking about with that, because it doesn't go through the, I get my food truck license through the state, but I still get a vendor license through the city.
Yeah, so liquor licenses and other business licenses would still flow through the city.
Okay, thanks.
Brandon?
So just to understand the discrepancies, there's a lot of numbers that you kind of threw at us. Is there a lot of businesses that are operating with a state sales tax license but not a city?
And when we received that information from the state, they could just provide us numbers. They could not provide us a listing of businesses. And so they did have more physical locations within the city than we did. And then, it's like we also run into the issue of a business may close, and we have no way to get our back taxes that are owed to us. If we go state collected, the state makes sure to pay out the counties and the cities first, and then they leave any balance owing to the state, because then they can go enforce it and attach the businesses if necessary. And so that's kind of, I think, a good thing for us too, where that, when we do have people that are maybe only paying the state and not us, it will ensure that we're actually receiving the funds.
Tammy, this is a little off topic, but during the COVID shutdown and over the past couple of months, there's been a big increase in online sales. Have you been able to see about how much of an increase we've had in our sales tax revenue in the past few months?
We have seen an increase in sales tax revenue. I do not have those figures with me to let you know how much is for online sales, but we have seen certain sectors increase where I think home furnishings was one that was increasing, grocery was increasing, and general merchandise. And then, of course, the home improvement had
improvement.
increased as well.
So I asked this because when I had a mayor's meeting last month, they were reporting back on their sales tax revenues during the shutdown, and they were dramatically higher than Canyon City's. And yet we're the main shopping source. And they felt like their revenue increase was mostly because the state was collecting it. I think we were probably been losing quite a bit of sales tax revenue.
And that's what we think as well. You know, especially when you look at us only showing 1,200 online or out-of-area filers when they are showing more than 8,000. That's a huge difference. You know, even if it's only a few dollars that they're remitting, that it adds up over a course of time.
And so if I understand this correctly, the discrepancy in the number of businesses, right now we have the discrepancy, and really it's incumbent on the city to reconcile, the numbers and the lists. But by using this system, then we no longer have to do that reconciliation. The state uses their larger list of taxing entities that collect sales tax.
Yes.
Okay?
I think it's a great idea. I love it. To get it all in one shot as a small business owner, I think this is a fantastic move by the city.
Yes, Jim.
Because we have monthly kind of sales tax reports next year, is there any way over the next, it would be next year, to determine if we have increases, how much of that increase is related to state collections versus increase business sales in Canyon? You know what I'm saying? I mean, if we have a 15% increase next April, is there any way of knowing how much of that percentage of increase is related to the state collections versus good business?
What we could do is, we have reports right now that show us the collections by sector. So whether it's the home furnishings, the home improvement, we can compare those numbers. So we can see that, the general merchandise went up a certain percentage. And then we will also be able to run reports to see which businesses are submitting or remitting the taxes. So we can still compare that too. So we can look at our larger businesses and say, okay, this is what you had submitted to us in 2020. This is what you're submitting in 2021. And we can look at some of those on an individual basis, because we will have that capability still to look through the state system.
If nothing else, I mean, on the sales tax report, just putting a note on there for the next year that this includes any possible increases as a result of state collections, so that we don't get, those figures are gonna get skewed.
I think we're gonna get skewed no matter what, because if X amount of businesses aren't.
Right, that's what I'm saying.
Yeah,
Yeah.
It's gonna show additional sales tax.
Sure.
Which we normally associate with good business, and that may not necessarily be the case.
Yeah, it could just be missed collections, absolutely. I think for the reporting standpoint, yes, we can make some
A notation.
footnotes or asterisks, making some type of notation that, the increased revenue is due to additional collections or additional filings.
And that would be something that would be identified when we do our annual audit in our CAFR, when we have our section that shows our sales tax history in our statistical tables. We would put a footnote that states that in, effective January of 2021, the city went state collected. And so that would be identified in our audited financials as well.
Frank? Yes.
Yeah, my question is going to be this. Seeing as how the state's going to be, in a sense, the big brother of all this sort of stuff, you know and I know, when a business owner is dissatisfied with something that's happening there, they're not gonna go to Big Brother, they're gonna come to us about their complaint. So what's gonna be the procedure that we're gonna set up to handle that complaint, even though, you know, it isn't generated by us, it's generated by the state? So are you guys set up for some kind of a, I guess, a backup plan for that?
So if there are concerns, we can't, if there anything that we can address at our level, we will. Otherwise, we will have customer service that we would have to direct them to with the state. But if necessary, we could have that call with the business owner at the same time to the state, so then we can try to get that resolved.
Well, and that's come real important with the message that John said about notifying the business owner. When we send some kind of a notification, if we could put some kind of a, I guess, a highlight with regards to, you know, what could happen, this way they're not going to be 100% caught off guard, and then it also benefits to help you guys out when we do get those complaints, with, you know we're going to get them, so.
Right.
Yeah, and we have our own contacts with Department of Revenue as well. So if we run into an issue where a business owner is not getting the response that they need from the state customer service line, we can reach out to our own contact at Department of Revenue and see if we can resolve it that way.
Jim, did you have a comment?
Just
Yes,
so
Brandon.
just so I'm clear on how online sales taxes work, and this is from my understanding. If somebody in Canyon City has a business and they sell something online, and somebody in New York, California purchases that, there's still a city sales tax paid to Canyon City, correct?
If you are shipping out of state, you do not collect the city's sales tax. You would collect the other area's
Okay.
sales tax.
Yep.
But if you were buying from New York or California, then you would pay city sales tax to that vendor, and they should remit to us.
Okay.
It used to be the point of transfer. Is that still the terminology they use? That wherever a product transfers ownership physically,
That's where
the taxation
Okay.
takes place.
Wish that was true with new cars, but, oh well. So I do have a question, and this is the hard question, and I would like a little bit, because we have a current FTE assigned to this job of collecting city sales tax, and so I'd like a little bit further explanation or a discussion, perhaps, of what that means in terms of staffing. You did mention that we have a retirement coming up. I'd just like some more information in there to make sure that we're not, I think what city council's, one of city council's roles here is to make sure that we're not just, making work for an employee that may be a valuable employee, may be a popular employee, and that could be the concern. And so I'm just asking for information to help address that concern that people listening to us may have.
And as I mentioned, currently we do have a payroll position, part-time payroll position that is vacant. We did delay in backfilling that position with COVID. And so right now, one of our accounting managers has continued to do payroll along with some other duties, the accounts receivable billing for the other departments besides water. And so those functions would actually be transferred to the sales tax person. And so that would help backfill some of the time. And then again, we would still have some enforcement that we would need to do for taxes, tax returns that should have been filed in 2020 and prior. So we would still have that would need to be done. And then if we have the URA, then there'll be some other duties that will be assigned based on that as well, with the allocation of the sales tax and some of the research that need to be done with that.
Okay, let me ask the question a different way. So, will this require a shuffling or rewriting of job duties that we currently have for our positions?
For one position, yes, it will.
For one position?
Yes, the
Okay,
sales tax.
and you mentioned a person will be retiring, and
Yes.
and those duties might come to this person that's retained?
And we will look to see what all, how much time is involved with sales tax once it changes. And then, how, we have an idea of how much time payroll already takes, so we know how many of the hours will be absorbed by that. And then we've done a little bit of reorganization within finance now, knowing the person was going to retire and they've actually already gone part-time. And so some of those duties have been reallocated to the accounting managers. And so those additional duties, depending on the time, we may be able to actually have enough, there should be enough work to keep one FTE. And then we don't know if we would still need a half-time, but currently we had budgeted the full-time sales tax, we had 3 accounting managers that were full-time. We've gone to 2 and made one of them, they went back to their former position of accountant as part-time, and then we had the part-time payroll person. So we would have some salary savings there and still be able to get everything done within the department.
Okay, and so I would ask Ryan, Mr. Administrator, to please make sure that you assure yourself that we're, that this, what's going on is appropriate and, responding to our changing circumstances. I mean, things are changing, and that's fine. And so I just ask that you make sure that that is indeed the case.
It is, and we've held off on hiring some of these positions, not only because of COVID, but because we've been planning for this as a potential change as well. So we have some accounting managers that are doing more work than they normally do, trying to make sure that we're meeting all of our obligations and things like that. And this would take off some of that additional work and spread it out the way it should be.
Thank you. Yes, Frank.
The one comment I want to make, and this kind of relates to the comment that John made earlier. I do believe that our staff is knowledgeable enough that they're not going to create any kind of a position just because they like somebody or they think that person is friendly or whatever the case may be. I have total confidence that our staff will, when it comes to the point of having to hire somebody, I don't care what position it is, that they'll do what needs to be done for the betterment of the city and how it has to operate for all the residents of that. I just want to make that confident. I do have confidence in our staff when that happens, that they will do the job that we've hired them to do. Thank you.
Absolutely.
Any other comments from council or mayor?
I'm just gonna give a thumbs up, let's do it.
Sure.
Absolutely, I love it. I do,
All right.
I think it's great.
And we will be coming back to council at a later date with the required code changes. We will do that we were anticipating, is that one of the September meetings? Catherine, do you recall?
I believe it's the second meeting in September.
I think it's the 23rd. It's maybe the Vision Committee meeting on the 23rd.
Okay,
Yeah, so
Great.
we will be back to discuss the changes with the code.
great.
All right. Thank you.
And-
Appreciate it.
You're welcome, and thank you for being here, Tammy, and filling us in on this. And now I guess we turn to the US 50 pedestrian crossing design concept.
We will, and I will turn that time over to Adam and the consultants, and Adam is on the Zoom conference.
Good evening, everybody.
Good evening.
So today we wanted to bring the US 50 pedestrian crossing design concept to you. I know not everybody there has been involved in the process from the beginning, and it's been a fairly long process. And so I'll give a little bit of background before I turn it over to our consultants with Wilson Company. So you're probably familiar with a number of plans that we have that we've developed since, well, we started probably in 2012 and went from there. We started out with the Downtown Strategic Plan, then we went to the US 50 Corridor Plan, and then wrapped that up with the Riverfront Development Plan. And all of the goals of all those plans were to kind of tie in the downtown area and make improvements strategically to the area and connect the riverfront area to the downtown area, as well as make improvements to the highway. And then the most recent effort that we completed was the US 50 West Access Control Plan, which I believe everybody was part of that. So back in 2015, we hired Wilson Company to do a study on what the best method would be to get people across the highway, because we knew the highway, especially for pedestrians and bicyclists, was a barrier between the riverfront area and downtown, and also did not lend itself to people being in that area south of the river, if they were visiting the railroad or something like that, and being able to also then, without getting back in a car, being able to visit downtown or vice versa. And so we went through a study process, and in that process, it was a fairly rigorous public process. We had actually 2 citizen committees. We had one citizen committee that we started up with. The city council at the time wanted an even more public and involved process. So we had a short restart with a new committee, went through that process, and then finished that in around 2017 on the study, presented the preferred alternates to the city council. The preferred alternates were chosen. And then there was a pause, because after the study was done and the preferred alternative was chosen, we had not quite wrapped up all the connecting studies that we wanted to do to gather all the information that was necessary for what we wanted to incorporate in the plan. And also we needed to complete the access control plan, knowing that accesses would be impacted by the improvements that we were trying to make. So now we're to the fun part, in my opinion, what the fun part is, and that's final design and actual construction. And so far, the bulk of all this project has been paid for using state and federal grant dollars. Currently, the total project is $2.7 million. Of that, only the city will only be responsible for about 3% of that, $90,000 total, when it's all said and done. And what the project specifically entails is these improvements for crossings and medians between 1st Street and 15th Street. That's what we consider the downtown corridor. The initial study was only done for 1st to 9th Street. And since then, we've gotten additional funding to complete the section from 9th to 15th as well. The construction funding within that $2.7 million only covers the section from 1st to 9th. So the goal is by the end of this year, we will have the full design done for the entire, what we call phase 1 and phase 2, which is 1st to 9th phase 1, 9th to 15th phase 2. And then we will be able to construct phase 1, 1st to 9th Street next summer. So that's a plan. We sent out some roll plots for you guys to look over the weekend. Hopefully you brought them with you. We'll have them on the screen, but I know there's a lot of detail there that may be hard to see on the screen. So if you have your roll plots in front of you, I ask that you refer to those. On the phone to discuss this is Kelly and Maureen with Wilson Company. Maureen was involved in the original study, so we have her here for any background information, any information that you may have on the traffic engineering that went into the analysis and the preferred alternative. And then Kelly, who's not new to the city, she's been working with us on our 2A projects, is new to this project, and she's handling the design phase of it. So at this point in time, I will turn it over to Wilson Company.
Thanks, Adam. Can you hear me okay?
Yes, we can.
So basically, since all the planning processes are kind of wrapped up, we're now moving forward into the design. I've taken over as the design lead to kind of pull all the information that was put out in all those different plans that Adam talked about and get them down on paper. So we're coming to you today with where we are on the design, being good stewards of government dollars, making sure that we don't get too far ahead of ourselves and that we're all on the same page and in agreement with what we propose to include in the construction documents. So real quick, I'm just going to go through, Adam kind of already touched on the project background, how we got to today. I'll give a little more details on what we're going to be proposing with the construction portion of the project. And then we can get into the design details and some of the items that are included in the plan, talk about next steps, and then open it up for discussion with you guys. So going back at US 50 corridor plan back in 2015, you'll recall the existing section is an 80-foot right-of-way, 65-foot edge of pavement to edge of pavement or curb line to curb line. We're not planning on changing that at all. What we'll just do is take that 12-foot in the median and do a raised landscaped median with turn lanes. So that information came from the US 50 corridor plan, and we pulled that straight into our design here. So you'll see kind of overall there's 5 main features incorporated into our design. The roadway width, like I said, stays the same as what it is now. We'll be doing some improvements to the ADA pedestrian ramps, the ones that haven't been fixed in the last few years. There's 39 that will be either repaired or replaced as part of this project. There'll also be 6 new mid-block pedestrian crossings, 4 crosswalks that were approved in the pedestrian crossing study and preferred alternative between 1st and 9th Street. And then an additional 2 crosswalks between 9th and 15th. The actual location will be determined on the results of an engineering analysis when we look at safety, traffic flow, and access considerations where the people are moving in between. But in general, you'll see the 4 locations in phase 1 and then 2 then again in phase 2. The 4th part, this idea of raised medians throughout the corridor. They provide traffic calming, aesthetic improvements, and then also provide a refuge space in those mid-block crossing locations for pedestrians to only have to cross one side of the road at a time. And then the last piece, of course, is going back to the US 50 West Access Control Plan, is the proposed access changes. So we've gone ahead and made the assumption that accesses that are impacted by the median locations will be closed or otherwise restricted throughout the corridor. So those are all identified in this plan as well. We did make the assumption that a lot of these closures and changes would happen now. So the access control plan talked about made recommendations that a couple of the accesses could be closed at any time. And so really looking for feedback from you on whether or not in some of these locations that's something that happens now or gets pushed off into the future, maybe when redevelopment happens. So just in summary, there's 19 locations where accesses will be completely closed or removed, and 83 locations where either the access is restricted to a right-in, right-out only, meaning you can't turn left into or out of the driveway, or a 3/4 movement where you can perhaps turn left into it, but you can't turn left out of it. So again, this is the preferred alternative that was identified in the pedestrian access study. We're showing the same 80-foot right-of-way. This is what you'll see in the control plan document, with a 7-foot median. The existing section is on the top here in this graphic, and then the proposed on the bottom, where you see this existing, or this proposed median in the proposed raised median in the center of the roadway, excuse me. So just getting into the design, I'll go over it quickly now. It's a long corridor. I don't want to get into too many details because I know there's specific locations that we'll want to talk through and get feedback on. But first through third, again, pedestrian improvements in general, that the legend or the key for this map, to make it quick. Orange coloring is curb ramp improvements or changes. Pink is removal of accesses. Green is right in, right out locations, and blue is the proposed median. So you can see really quickly what locations are proposed to have modifications or access removals just by looking quickly at the colors used in the graphic. So again, first through third, then moving down the corridor, third to seventh. We can go back to all of these as we get into the discussion. You see the three of the mid-block crossings from phase 1 show up between third and seventh. And then as we go further to the east, 7th to 11th, again, just typical median, raised median locations, turn bays. I will note the length of the medians and the length of the turn bays has not been finalized in this graphic. That'll be dependent on traffic analysis as we move forward in design. So that portion of this graphic are just concept level ideas. And then through to 15th Street. So once we kind of have concurrence on the design, the next steps will be for us to continue to hold stakeholder and specific property owner meetings. We've talked to a lot of these property owners in the past through the study process. We're going to talk to them again, especially the ones who have access changes. So we'll meet with them. We are planning on holding an additional public open house for those who aren't maybe directly impacted, can come attend the public open house when we've got a more finalized preliminary design complete. We'll also work through the right-of-way process and acquire any potential right-of-way. We've identified worst case 30 parcels that may be impacted and need either permanent right-of-way or permanent easement mostly for the construction of the pedestrian ramps. The plan, I think Adam touched on this a little bit, the preliminary design will be complete this fall in 2020 with construction plans ready to construct something already by the end of this year so that the project can go out to bid and contractors can get started with construction when the weather turns nice in the spring and summer. So that's all I really have is kind of an overview. I'd like to open it up to everyone. What we're really looking for from you tonight is some concurrence in the design, some head nods so that we don't move too forward down the track with design and have there be concerns on project elements that should or should not be included in the design. So I just want to bring it back to you, open it up for comments, and see if there's any changes or any questions that I can answer.
Thank you, Kelly. And so with that, yes, Jim.
I thought I heard you mention that there would be some access closures.
Yes, that's correct. So there's a couple driveways that either is a duplicate driveway, there's, 2 driveways accessing the same parcel, or an access, a driveway that doesn't actually drive into anything, that will be closed.
I was under the understanding from the access plan that those closures would only be triggered by a change of use and/or a safety factor. Is that not?
So Jim,
Is that what we
Jim,
agreed to?
actually, there were three things: safety factor, change in use, or a project. And this would be a project. But that being said, the closures that Kelly's talking about are the ones that were identified in the access control plan that could be closed today with no trigger. They serve no purpose. So when we're referring to closure, that's what we're talking about. The rest are all modifications.
Have those business owners with the projected closures been notified?
Oh, not yet. No, this is, they're just doing preliminary concept right now. The next step is to start meeting with property owners so that we can fine tune the design based on what's going on at their particular location.
So I have a question. And my question is that for instance, some of the closures that could be accomplished today, it was my understanding that the business owner, absent a project, could volunteer to have that closed and perhaps, use the city's sidewalk campaign to do that. So my question is, for the closures that we're now saying that are required because of a project, who pays for that closure?
Everything in this process will be paid for by the project funds.
And that's 3% city and 97% other sources.
Correct. So when we go in and change an access to a business, we pay to make that physical change. They do not.
Okay? Yes, Jim.
The other thing that would help, and I don't know who made the map, Adam? You or William?
Wilson.
At least from
Wilson Company did it.
from my elementary perspective, it would help if you identified those businesses along the route. It's difficult in some of these to determine who's who. But a little note on some of those, I think, in terms of what businesses we're talking about would be at least helpful to me, and I don't think would require a whole lot of effort.
No, Jim, in fact, that's a good thing. So what we'll do for you, for council, is we will create a list of what those properties are and the address. We'll use the same list that we had on the access control plan, and we'll get that to you guys soon. And that way, you don't have any surprises. You've got a heads up of where those places are at. We can do that.
Yes, Jim, go ahead.
And I realize you said that the turn lane length is still to be determined, but it just seems to me like that the eastbound turn lane to 15th Street is too short. I mean, that turn lane looks to me like it's less than the one going into 6th Street. And if that turn lane, now that we have a median there, any turn lane that's in excess of, the number of vehicles is in excess of obviously the lane, we're going to wind up blocking that left lane.
I had the same concern that traffic already goes pretty far back waiting at that light.
And there's really, I mean, when you look at the 14th to 15th, the purpose of the median, I think, was twofold: to calm the traffic, but then it was also to minimize pedestrian crossing. And I think when you look at the study from years ago, that particular area between 14th and 15th was pretty low when you take out the numbers for the crosswalk at 15th, at 15th.
And I have a comment in that same area also. And the issue is that CDOT has turned off the left turn arrow when you're headed east and you're turning onto 15th Street, turning left off of Highway 50 as you're headed east. The left turn arrow is now turned off. It no longer activates. It no longer ever goes green.
Right.
It's either red or flashing yellow. And so there is I don't want to call it synergism, but there's connection between how that stoplight functions and the length necessary for traffic to be able to back up in that left turn bay. I'll just point that out. Yes, Frank?
Adam, my question is going to be, are we going to get involved with the entire phase from 1st to 15th Street starting in 2021, or are we going to start with 1st to 9th?
So we only have funding, construction funding for 1st to 9th for now.
Okay.
So that'll happen. That'll happen in 21, and then we'll have to look for additional funding to complete the other segment.
And the reason I asked
Yeah.
that question is because this first phase, I don't think we're going to have as much problems with those turn lanes as we will when we get into that second phase. Because that second phase, I think we're going to have a lot of problems, just like John was mentioning, because especially when you look at going west on 50 at 9th Street, that left turn lane there that's there, it could be 2 miles long at sometimes because it does get into the traffic lane. They backs up way there.
Mm-hmm.
So, but right now we're looking at just the 1st through the 9th.
Yes.
Okay, thank you.
Adam?
Yes, Jim.
And John, I can speak real quick to the question about the signal stuff. I can tell you I'm waiting on some further details from CDOT, but they are changing out their system, and they're moving away from the adaptive system that was in there and going back to a timed coordinated system, and they will be doing that in the next couple of months. And with that, they're looking at some turn restrictions even ahead of this project in anticipation of some of those issues. I know that they are still looking hard at the scenario there at the Loaf and Jug with left turns and the issues that police department has there, as well as the left turns out at Dozier and Fremont Drive. So we'll definitely be coordinating everything with them. Every bit of this design gets vetted through CDOT as well and their traffic control people. So that'll all be looked at. The medians and turn lanes on there, as Kelly mentioned, they're just conceptual for now to show you that there's an intention for a left turn lane to be here, but the length of that still has to be determined.
Thank you, Adam. And I would say from my perspective that CDOT's involvement in here is quite alarming. Yes.
Yeah.
Well, that's only based on their track record, though.
That's correct.
So the intersection, Adam, at 9th and RGB, specifically if you're heading south on 9th and turning west on to RGB, that's nearly an impossible turn now without chewing up the curb. And I see you've got some change there, looks like ramps and what have you. Do you think that there's an opportunity to address that turning there? You know what I'm talking about?
So you said southbound 9th west to 50, right?
Right. Right there by the.
We've actually made that improvement already with the 2A project. So you probably haven't seen it because the road's not open yet. But if you get a chance, next time you swing by there, check out that corner. We've actually made that improvement so that you're not ruining your rims on that corner.
Thanks.
I have a further question about CDOT. They're looking at restrictions at 9th Street, is that correct? Adam, do you have some idea of what restrictions they're looking at?
Yeah, the issue, whether you do it or not, Loaf and Jug is one of our, if not our number one, depending on which year it is, hotspot for traffic accidents. And the majority of the issues are left turns in and out of that place. And so they're looking at some temporary barriers, the tubular delineators that I'm sure you've seen in other places along the center line as a restriction on some of those left turn movements that are happening at that corner.
Thank you.
So I also am concerned with that median though between 9th and 10th because the traffic backs up there too quite a bit going westbound. Way up, going west, coming westbound.
On a busy day, you can't make this turn right here. You can't turn onto RGB.
Right, but the key takeaway from that intersection is there'll be a movement restriction off of 10th Street. So regardless of how long that turn bay needs to be, we're gonna take out those people that are trying to make left turns out of 10th Street so that we don't have that conflict, because you know that that's an issue 2 lanes westbound, people make gaps for people to kind of come through there. The far lane doesn't know somebody left a gap for someone to come through, and they get hit.
But also just that the median in the middle of the road, that traffic already backs up that far along that median into that turn lane. And so they're going to be blocking an entire lane.
So, Adam, would some of that be handled with the timing and the cycling of the lights there at 9th Street?
No.
Right, again, graphically, that's just to show you that we intend to restrict the movement at 10th Street. The length of that median and the turn bay is subject to change based on final design. So when we come back with preliminary design, you'll see what we're looking at and considering for final length of that. You're absolutely right, and that's what we have to look at before we can actually design. This is just to conceptually show you that we're getting cut off that left turn movement from 10th Street.
On the same subject of medians, our East Canyon medians are looking pretty rough, and they need some TLC. I don't think they're really reflecting the image that we want for Canyon City. I really want to make sure that our medians on the west, number one, they need TLC no matter what, eastbound. But westbound, we want to make sure that they are very aesthetic. The landscaping is really reflective of the image and branding we want for Canyon City as well. That's really important to me. And I also have a question on the 6 mid-block crosswalks. Are all of those going to have hawk systems, or some of them have hawk systems? What are we thinking for that?
So I can let Maureen jump in here, but I can tell you, no, initially they will not have hawk signals. They will just have the rapid flashers. Am I right there, Maureen?
I believe that is true. But they could have hawk. That would be part of the additional traffic analysis. And we did work through CDOT and acceptance of either of those options, whichever was best, and did do traffic analysis from 9th to 1st.
So when you're saying light flashers, is that like what we have on First Street?
Yes.
Yes.
Okay. Yeah, I'm okay with that.
Okay.
So-
So I have, before we get too far away from the intersection at 9th and left turns and the left turn bay there, what will be the design criteria that determines the length of that left turn bay? Is somebody actually going to go out there and observe and adjust length based on observations, or are there going to be other more esoteric factors that are used?
We actually do a simulation in software called Synchro that takes into account the signalization and the progression of the signals. And it establishes what the queue length is, and then we provide storage that will be at least accommodate the 95th percentile queue length from the simulation. And we would do existing and forecast for a 20-year design period.
Thanks for that answer, but I only caught one word out of 10.
Yeah, Adam, Maureen's coming off a little bit muffled. Could somebody repeat that, please?
And that could be
I might not be talking into the microphone. Is that better?
That is
A
better.
lot better.
Okay, so we will not be doing it by field observation. We will be simulating it with software called Synchro that will allow us to take into account the effect of the signal timing and to optimize that. And from that software, we can get estimates of the 95th percentile queue length, and that's what we're looking at, and we'll provide storage length that at least accommodates that. And we'll look at existing plus a 20-year design forecast.
That was better. I did understand most of that. Not all of it, but most of it. Thank you for that. Yes, Jim?
So, we're talking about a spring, summer construction? Is that what I'm understanding?
That would be ideal. Of course, that the critical path issue with that is final environmental clearance through CDOT, and acquisition of easements.
How do you,
So
when you say that that's ideal, from what perspective?
that's a good time to construct these things.
Construction season.
What? I would think the weather conditions would be the reason for that. Snow's falling and everything.
Some of the traffic's a lot heavier.
I know there's a lot of traffic in that timeframe, but when you look at it, that's the best time.
Yeah, can we divert the traffic during the summer down Main Street while there's construction happening?
After we did that once, you wouldn't want us to do it again. I think you'd get more complaints than you'd have happy business owners.
Okay. Adam, one thing that's going to be real important when you start having those discussions with the public, please emphasize to them, we try to do it every time we can, emphasize to them, this is not interfering in one way or another with our 2A money that the voters approved of. It's not, even our share that we have to come up with to get the project done. No way is our 2A money coming into that, because people, the minute they say the city's putting in money with roads, they start saying, well, are they going to use that 2A money for this project? So we know it's not, but we need to really stress that when we start having these meetings with the public, that it's all funded separately and no 2A money is going to be involved in that.
Thank you, Frank.
No problem.
A part of those meetings too is one of the successes of the study that we did previous to this one about the closures and the turn lanes is that we involved city council and the public from the very beginning. And I think it's going to be really important to make sure that our businesses are aware and involved and be heard from the very beginning, and that they have a buy-in to this project. And I'm especially concerned for Big Daddy's and for the train. And of course, we've already mentioned Loaf and Jug as well. And probably the Sunflower Bank. Those are some really big traffic spots. And then I also had some questions for 3rd and 5th on the corners, because 3rd Street is kind of considered our yellow brick road of connecting the Riverwalk to downtown. And there's going to be some improvements on the curbs, and wondered if landscaping could be included in those curbs. And also on 5th Street, once upon a time, they created some curbs because there was going to be an arch welcoming to downtown, and that's dead, a long time ago dead. And maybe if we could have some landscaping there that matches the medians, kind of helps with that connection from the riverfront to the downtown, and kind of is an additional pull to downtown.
That's a good idea. We'll look into that.
Hang on, Jim, I have one more question here concerning our CDOT restricting into Loaf and Jug. Adam, do you know when that is going to happen?
No, it's only something that's been discussed for some time now, but we know with the signal changes and this project coming up, it's probably closer, sooner than later. But it's something that's been discussed for a few years now. It had been discussed with past managers of Loaf and Jug, but nothing recent. I know CDOT's current effort as of this week, it will be reaching out to them and having a discussion.
And so let me ask the question in a little bit different way. When will CDOT, how much notice will CDOT give you before they begin construction of a restriction?
So there is a process called Form 138, and since we are an approving authority for access control on CDOT highways, I actually sign that access change document. I sign that as a co-signer with CDOT to send that to the owner as the official notice. So, of course, there's a discussion before that happens, but that's the official notice, and so I'm part of that process. Does council play any role in that? Is what?
Does council play any role in that approval process?
No.
Okay, thank you. That's what I wanted to know. Yes, Jim.
2 questions. I'm assuming that the issue that you're talking about on RGB into Loaf and Jug would be making a left-hand turn eastbound out of that turn lane into Loafenjug. Is that correct?
No,
Westbound.
so it's mainly left turn out. It's mainly left turns out, but there also is the issue with both southbound 9th and westbound 50. They try to stop. They stop in the middle of the lane to turn left into Loafenjug and hold up the main line
Yes.
or the left turn bay for 9th Street. I don't know if you've experienced it, but you'll miss a green arrow at 9th Street westbound, and then you come to find somebody was waiting to turn into Loafenjug, and they're not even turning at 9th.
Right.
So that's one of the common issues, but the most dangerous condition is them turning out across that double yellow and multiple lanes.
Okay, and to accomplish that is where you're talking about these, you call them some kind of a barrier that they'd put up there?
Yeah, it's those tubular delineators.
Right.
So they're just flexible posts that they attach to the pavement.
So they have to run it over to know the way to turn.
So
Right.
what's,
Yeah, yes.
Adam, what's the desired entry and exit of Loafenjug?
From 9th, right?
Right in, right out would be the desired.
Yeah, right off of 9th.
So you'd have to be going eastbound
Yep,
only.
yes.
Or to
Correct.
access from 9th, right?
Correct. Or you'd have to turn on 9th, make a turn somewhere and come and approach it from a different direction. Yes. Which again, legally today is so the tubular delineators will just
Reinforced.
help for compliance.
Right.
The current movements we're talking about that are problematic are already illegal.
Right. Yeah, they're crossing that double yellow line.
Crossing crossing a turn lane into a driveway access. Yeah, it's a mess.
Right.
So we're just trying to increase compliance.
So, slightly different subject. Were you able to attain any numbers?
Numbers on,
For the budget.
In regards to how much we've paid for this project?
yeah, it's in your inbox. Adam,
Yeah,
do you have those
I
numbers
emailed
handy?
that out. Yeah, I emailed that out, and I can send it to the balance of council. But to date, we've spent just a little over $50,000 of the city's money, and in total, we should spend about 90.
Ryan, I've gotten a request to have the slides on the screen so people watching on Facebook Live or Zoom can see what we're talking about.
Oh, the street
The
slides.
street slides.
You can only show one or the
Okay.
other.
And
So maybe show whatever intersection we're talking about, Kelly.
Well, most of the discussion is on
On 9th Street?
9th to 15th.
Yeah.
That one.
7th to 11th.
Nope, back one. Oh, there it is.
So they got it, 4 slides, we got it.
There we go.
Yeah, that's it.
Thank you.
Do we need to catch anybody up?
Not sure that you'll be able to see that very clearly on the computer screen, but if that's okay, at least there's a reference up there. Any more questions from council?
Can I make a comment?
Comments, yes.
The objective of this whole project, if I recall properly, and this is 5 years ago, maybe 6, was to be able to get people safely across US 50 so that they could go to the river. Is that correct?
That is one of the main components, not the only.
But that's how the whole project started, was it?
Riverfront.
That's how we obtained, that component helped us obtain some of the money, some of the color of money was safety related. So yes, that is a major component.
So we're accomplishing the movement, the safe movement, and when I say safe, now it may not be technically safe, but people feeling safe. We're doing that by the crosswalk at 3rd, and the one between Fourth and Fifth, and the one between First and Second. And then I guess there's one further down.
And then we have some, yeah, and then we have a couple additional ones
North,
east of Ninth,
East.
where we know there's a fair amount of crossing where the restaurants are at between 13th and 14th.
And just comment-wise, the underpass, and this is pedestrian, underpass for pedestrian and overpass for pedestrian were not viable projects or viable options from a cost standpoint.
A cost standpoint and impact to the neighboring properties and businesses.
And we also had that citizens committee that spent a lot of time on it, and this was their kind of recommendation to council too, that would be more acceptable for our community to embrace.
But you're still not getting people safely across the street.
Oh, I think it's a lot safer.
Especially here, really there too.
The other options only, the other options, number one, we couldn't afford, but it'd only give one safe crossing area, whereas this is providing 6 additional safety crossing areas.
We're talking about interpretation of what's safe and what you feel safe.
That's true. If I had a walker and had a difficulty walking, it's.
Well, it's the, whatever you have to cross with, having an island to land on is safer than standing in the left turn lane.
Technically.
Well,
I mean, who,
If
When
I
this is
might
all- when
add
this is all
something
done, are
also
you-
by having these multiple crossings, because we looked with counts at where people cross and what the origins and destinations are. If you did an underpass or overpass, it's going to be in one location. And people are only going to use it if that's the connection they want to make. So
right.
John?
yes.
But my comment's going to be, with the phase that we're going to start, First to Ninth, everything in that sense is kind of workable and can be done. Most of the concerns right now will come when we deal with the second phase, and that's 9th through 15th. So First through 9th Street, based on the concept that you have provided for us, I feel is a comfortable place for us to get going with the design features that have been mentioned, the safety features that have been mentioned and everything else. And once that First and 9th is done, then that's when it's going to get real heavy with regards to concerns with 9th to 15th. Thank you.
Yes, Ashley.
Oh, and my comfort level won't be achieved until we have involved the business owners. Again, I can't reiterate this enough. They must be involved from the get-go to be able to be heard and to have their input given and to get the buy-in.
And, yes, go ahead.
I definitely agree with Frank's comment and Mayor Smith's comment. My concern is the funding phase for Phase 2 and finishing both projects. The first one, Phase 1, looks accomplishable. Phase 2 is my concern because I don't like unfinished projects.
Thank you. Yes, Jim.
Do you have a construction estimate for Phase 1?
$2 million.
And what percentage portion of that would be a city responsibility, by guess?
Zero. That construction is 100% funded with state funds.
What about Phase 2? What's the possibility of obtaining CDOT funding for Phase 2?
Fairly strong, especially with a successful first phase. I mean, the track record's there. We have a $2.7 million project that's 97% funded by somebody else.
And I would point out, I understand your point completely. Madam Mayor, and totally agree with it. But I would point out that the access control plan has already discussed all of these restrictions with the business owners. And so they were fully informed and involved in that. That did result in that the approval of that plan. And so the other thing that we may face is just the reality of now that hearing that this may be triggered if I sell my property to, this is going to be triggered when the city installs medians, may change my opinion.
And the medians are whole different animal to accepting, and I know that the train and Big Daddies have big concerns about those.
Yes, Jim.
But I know that you were here for some of those meetings, and anybody that asked a question at those meetings about the medians, we're told in those meetings, this meeting is not about the medians, it's about access.
Yes.
And we're not answering questions about medians at this time. Those need to be brought up later. So I'm not sure where that balance is at. I concur with you about the closures. My concern is we're now talking about some immediate closures, and I don't think that that's what was maybe understood. And I realize that those may not have any impact on a particular business, but I think that's one of the things we need to address immediately, is that those access points that are being closed, we need to immediately contact those business owners or those landowners or whoever that is and let them know that that access point is being closed.
Yeah, and I think, as part of the public process, we'll be doing that, certainly having that outreach, having the public meeting. If I'd have to go back and look at my notes, and maybe Adam, offhand, but if I remember correctly, there were a couple of those closures where the property owners acknowledged that those accesses were not really accesses or should be closed.
That's correct, and I want to hopefully bring City Council to a certain comfort level in writing this next phase contract with Wilson. We based it on our positive experience we had with our method in the access control plan. That we got the feedback from City Council that you thought it worked how we contacted the property owners and involved them, and we plan to do the exact same thing with this phase.
So am I interpreting
We have
from
no intention of surprising anybody.
that we're talking about another expense with Wilson?
No, so this is something that we've already written into the contract with them. So in this phase, we took what we learned from that, and we made sure that Wilson is going to take the same type of process. We are going to make an individual reach out contact with these impacted property owners.
Thank you.
And I'm sure that we expect the same. We'll get some that are interested and some that aren't, and
Right.
And we'll work through that as we move through the process with each of them that we need to. And if there's some of those that we need to involve, some of you, I know, outside of what we have to do for public meeting process, we'll get you guys involved.
Do you feel like you've gotten the feedback that you need to move forward to the next step?
I believe so. Kelly, what do you think?
I think this has been great and helpful feedback. I appreciate the comments.
That's not answering the question. Is it?
Ryan, do you have any other foreseeable questions that we might need to address?
No, I don't think so at this time. We'll, I think we've got the information that we need, and as we progress, if we run into any other questions, we'll bring them back to council.
So before we close out, what's the next step? What's the next couple of steps?
Yeah, Adam, you want to talk about next steps?
Sure, and Kelly, just step in if you need to. The next step is to create that list of impacted accesses as we discussed. So we'll get that list together and probably a more tabular form for you. We'll get that in your hands so that you have it, and we will start reaching out to those individual property owners. We'll also be calling in the other stakeholders that we think need to be involved, and then setting up the timeline for the public meeting. I don't know, do you have a targeted date for that public meeting, Kelly?
No, we wanted to hold it after we had completed preliminary design where we could get that information as far as get a closer picture of what the turn lane lengths are going to be and have some more of those final design details worked out, and then have also had a chance to meet with the infected property owners before going out to the public. So I think probably thinking late October, early November timeframe, if I had to wager a guess.
Okay.
Yes, Jim, we've got a
Ed,
couple
I-
of other comments here. Jim?
I do have another question, Adam. You and I had conversations about if in fact the median has a calming effect on the traffic. I had stated that it made sense that the median would start prior to First Street. And I thought had some form of agreement from you that that was a possibility, but apparently that's not going to be the case.
Probably not in this project simply because of funding. If we get to a stage where we've finalized design and have more of a preliminary budget, I mean, right now the budget for construction is very, very high level. So once we get through preliminary design, we'll have some preliminary estimates from Wilson, and if there's a possibility to bring in additional elements, we absolutely will.
Adam, I got a quick question for you, and it's, I just want to get your opinion on this because I missed a lot of this when, and you know why. But realistically, coming off of First Street or coming off of Third, how many people do you think are actually going to go to the crosswalk down to the city parking lot there? Or are they just going to cross? I see a lot of pedestrians crossing.
Well, during the study, that's what we discovered they were actually doing. In fact, where the one crosswalk is at from City Hall to the park, we actually had a pedestrian hit in that area doing that very movement. So we know that they use the city parking lot as overflow during events. And so that's the purpose of that crosswalk.
Okay, thank you.
And they use the one right there first, go to the railroad. Hope down right there, they walk over to go catch the train.
Well, and for the farmer's market, they would park in the city lot to get to the farmer's market when it was there.
Actually, I'll go there now because of the cold.
Okay, is there anything, do you have anything else, Ryan?
Actually, Adam, the crosswalks that are currently at Third Street, will those remain?
Yes, so the signalized intersection, 3rd, 9th, and 15th, everything remains as far as being protected pedestrian crosswalks.
Okay, thank you.
Well, I have one. Since we're going to look at doing some landscaping at 3rd and 5th, can you add First Street to that too, since we have that easement there and property? That's another.
That is something, yeah, I don't know if we can put that in this project, again, because of budget, but I know that's something that Ryan and I are working on, and is part of every bit of this U.S. corridor plan that we have. And I know we're trying to solve some property issues there where we can get some RFPs out for development of that. And certainly we've already discussed internally on what those RFPs will include, and that's definitely one of the elements.
Thank you. And
I think, Adam, just to add to that real quick, we can look at if the design budget doesn't allow for some additional landscaping at those locations, what we can do from a design standpoint is look at things that wouldn't preclude additional landscaping going in and around those corners.
Okay.
Yeah, so make sure there's no barriers in the future. Okay.
Right.
I just have a quick question. When we're talking the start date for summer of 2021, roughly how early can we start there? Because, you know, obviously our weather here is a lot sooner, or is that strictly dependent on what CDOT says?
Well, they definitely have restrictions regarding that corridor based on traffic, especially in the summertime and holidays and so forth. But the earlier we can start in the year, the better.
They didn't stop the gap during the winter.
Right.
They did, they just finished one section.
And if
So-
we, yes.
Just in finalizing, did I understand you're going to provide a list in a tabular format or something of the businesses?
Yeah.
And not identify them on the map? Is that correct?
Correct. I think that'll be easier for you to follow. I mean, I think the map at the scale it's at, if we start adding names and address and that sort of stuff, we're gonna just make it even more difficult to decipher through. So, yeah, we'll provide that in tabular form for you. Very similar to what we did with the access control plan.
So Adam, would that be numbers on the businesses on the map?
Yes.
Okay, thank you.
Great.
I just want to say thank you. It's been a good presentation, and I actually really appreciate the large maps. It was really helpful to be able to visualize it on a bigger scale.
Yes.
I'm still not sold on it.
Thank you for that. And with that, I believe we're adjourned.